What's up, guys? 0-1 yesterday. What can you do? Bryce Miller did enough to get that done. Pitched well on the road, pitched really well, actually. He did more than was necessary and got absolutely no run support behind him. Seattle had a 1-0 lead pretty late in the game, I think 7th or 8th inning, which, of course, I needed them to cover the 1.5. It was at least possible still at that point, even though it was a very low-scoring game. But it wound up being in a situation where Detroit only had 3 hits in the entire game by the time the game was over, and they scored 2 runs and won the game 2-1. What can you do, man? Faedo, I think, only went like an inning in the opener for Detroit and walked 4 guys, and somehow Seattle did not score off of that. So maybe he went a little bit over an inning, I guess, because that would most certainly be a run unless there was some double play or something in between the two. I didn't watch the game, so I don't know what happened, but there were a lot of walks. So even though Seattle got 1 hit in the game, they only had 1 hit in the entire game. Their offense is pathetic, but they did have at least, I think, 5 or 6 guys reach base via the walk, which is how they had scored that 1 run, I think, earlier in the game. And other than that, their offense just couldn't do anything, and that was it. They should have won. Faedo had the opener. Like I said, he was gone from the game pretty early on. He was not good. He walked a bunch of guys. Miller obviously was the much better starter in the game. Went 7 innings and put in a really good performance. There's nothing he could do about this, really. Detroit brought in Kenta Maeda for like 5 innings or something. So he basically got the starter's workload. So it essentially became Miller against Maeda, who was a guy with an ERA over 6. And Seattle couldn't even score off of this guy. Or maybe they finally did. I think they scored the 1 run off of him probably. Come on, man. We move on to today. We got a full Friday baseball card. There were a few things I was eyeing. I mean, obviously the fact that Paul Skeens is pitching caught my eye. That's kind of an interesting matchup there. Seattle against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is returning home from a road trip, which is a bad spot, as I always say. They're returning home from the West Coast, I believe, too. Kind of a long road trip. When you have a situation like that, you tend to be a bit distracted coming into that game because you're returning to home life. You have home life to deal with. Paul Skeens is pitching. As I said, he's got to return to his smoking hot supermodel wife or whatever he's got going on there. Girlfriend, I don't know. I forget who she is, what's going on there. But Pittsburgh is in a bad spot. Seattle played yesterday, of course, because I lost on them yesterday. So Seattle's in the worst spot rest-wise because they did play yesterday. And they're actually having to travel a little bit going to Pittsburgh from Detroit, although not a huge amount of travel there, really. Not a huge deal. And Seattle probably a little bit pissed off because they just got swept by a not very good Detroit Tigers team. So you could expect Seattle to bring focus into this game with Pittsburgh returning home from the road trip. Looks like situationally it is a good spot to go against Pittsburgh. And the market is doing that with Pittsburgh down from -135 to -123. So the line is moving against them, and they are public because obviously the public is going to come in. They know who Paul Skeens is at this point. They're going to come in and play him. 77% of the tickets on Pittsburgh, 64% of the cash. So less of the cash, reverse line movement against him. But I just don't think I can go against Paul Skeens, man. I don't think Seattle's ever seen him before, so that gives him a little bit of an edge. Skeens, he's so good that it kind of almost negates like the bad situational spots. If it gets down into the bullpen, and maybe even though Seattle used some of their bullpen yesterday, but not a lot, because as I said, Bryce Miller put in a pretty deep performance there. So Seattle only went into their pen a little bit. Pittsburgh had the day off completely, so their pen is a little bit more rested. So it's a tough game to gauge. I really can't do it. And Logan Gilbert is pitching for Seattle. He has also been really good. Seattle, almost their entire starting rotation is quite good. So you tend to want to look to play Seattle and unders really for the most part, most of the time. So you could look to play an under here with 2 really good starters, but that's being the Skeens factor is obviously being factored into the under too, as this has slipped down from 7 to 7 juice to the under. So you have to pay like -115 to go under 7. The market percentages look opposite that for some reason. 68% of the tickets on the under, which again might mean the Skeens hype is just getting to such a degree that the public wants to come in and play the under. And they know Seattle can't really score. Seattle, as I mentioned, their offense is just pitiful right now, especially on the road, which is also really weird because Seattle's home Stadium, T-Mobile Park. I keep calling it Safeco. I think it's T-Mobile now. It is a very good pitcher's park, especially in recent years. We have 55% of the cash coming in on the over in this one. So it looks like the cash is actually coming in on the over, whereas the tickets coming in on the under. It's not something I want to get involved in here. I'm not going to do it. But just an interesting matchup there to talk about at least. And then what else was I going to talk about? I thought there was one other. Well, I mean, we do have some other situations here. I think you have the Mets having played yesterday and playing a tight game yesterday, but they're not traveling. They're staying at home, but they did play yesterday against Oakland and they actually lost the game to Oakland, but they had to use a bunch of their relief pitchers. So Miami is debatably in the better rest spot in that one. So that's a little bit of an interesting scenario there. And Rodri Munoz pitching for Miami, 24-year-old. His stats overall in the season are pretty terrible, but his stats against the Mets specifically are actually really good, shockingly good, even though, of course, they're in the same division. The Mets have seen him, even though he is young. The Mets are only 3 for 32 off him lifetime with one extra base hit, a double. They only have an 0.94 batting average off him in that sample size with a 272 OPS. So it could potentially be a spot to play the rested Miami team, even though Munoz is probably the worst of these two pitchers. Specifically against the Mets, though, he has good numbers, whereas Sean Manaea pitching for the Mets, he's a bit older, of course. His numbers this season are certainly better than Munoz numbers are. Manaea up against Miami has actually done horrendously. They are 9 for 23 off him lifetime, so not a huge sample size, but they've knocked him around. 3 doubles, 2 home runs, only 2-2 strikeout walk ratio, 391 batting average, and 1,223 OPS. So if you wanted to somehow take a shot on Miami, I wouldn't necessarily mind that. The market looks to be against it, though. And, of course, the Mets are a huge favorite, up from -205 to -234. That's just how bad Miami is in general. And the Mets, pretty good team. Mets obviously have the way better offense, so that's factoring in, and probably have the better bullpen, too, because Miami just sucks overall. 73% of the tickets on the Mets, 91% of the cash, however, on the Mets. It's one of those situations, though, where it looks like the Mets have every advantage, including in the starting pitching matchup. But as I just described, in this specific matchup, that I think takes away from that starting pitching advantage that the Mets appear to have. I don't think it's as significant. If you look at how these guys have done against these opposing hitters, it actually kind of looks the reverse. You could play Miami at like a huge underdog price, taking like plus 1.5 runs or some weird run line or something if you really wanted to do that. Whatever. So that's also interesting. What else was I going to point out? We did have a couple of other situations that I was looking at. Houston is returning home from a road trip as well, I believe. So that kind of puts them in a somewhat bad spot. They went to Texas, Boston, Tampa. So it was kind of a long road trip. It didn't take them that far really geographically, but a long road trip. So they're facing that, having to return home from being away for a long time. So they're going to be facing those return home distractions. They're in that type of spot with the White Sox coming in, and the White Sox coming off beating the Yankees once, but then losing to them pretty badly in the other 2 games, I think. White Sox are just a terrible team, man. But in this spot, Houston's returning home from a road trip, and the White Sox have their one really good pitcher on the mound, and Garrett Crochet. Problem is his numbers against Houston are actually really bad. Houston has really knocked him around. So it's not really something that I would want to actually do. I wouldn't really be able to do it. Houston's got Arrighetti pitching, Spencer Arrighetti, and he's been turning it on recently, really lighting it up after a horrific start to the season. He's a young guy, and he seems to be becoming something and rounding into form. And his overall stats this year still look awful because of how bad he was earlier in the season. But looking at what he's done recently, he is in much better form. So you could potentially look to play an under in that game too, maybe expecting both pitchers to maybe do all right there. But then looking at, like I said, Crochet has terrible numbers against Houston specifically. Arrighetti actually doesn't have good numbers against the White Sox either. So that kind of detracts from wanting to actually play the under there. I'm just going to stay away. That price has dropped. The total has dropped from 8.5 juice to the under down to 8 juice to the under. And I see just heavy tickets and cash both on the over right now. pregame. I don't know if their percentages are really accurate, but has that in 91% of tickets on the over and 99% of the cash on the over. I don't know about that. And Houston, of course, because the White Sox are just a terrible team. Houston is obviously the big favorite at home still at minus 180 in this one. With 87% of the tickets on them and 95% of the cash. So that is the deal there. Let me see what's going on here, man. What do we have going on here? I don't know. I got to look at my, I'm hearing sounds, man. Maybe my place is haunted. I'm like, got to look at my cameras. I'm like, what's going on here? All right. Now I'm totally distracted. Yeah, so there's nothing that I really want to do in that White Sox-Houston game. All right, let's get to the games that I'm actually going to play, I suppose, because I don't think there's anything else I was really going to talk about. I think there are, the Dodgers, I think, played yesterday while St. Louis was off, so that's a matchup today, but Dodgers haven't announced who's their starting pitcher yet today. St. Louis has Miles Mikolas pitching, and he's just not very good and not good against the Dodgers historically either. And then we got Atlanta also played yesterday while Anaheim was off. So that's also kind of an interesting spot, I guess, with Anaheim hosting them. Spencer Schwellenbach is pitching for Atlanta, and I think Anaheim has never seen him before, probably. Schwellenbach has been pitching really well as of late, too, but the market looks to be signaling strongly against Atlanta. I mean, they did play yesterday, so they don't have the rest advantage. Anaheim didn't play, but do you really want to fade Schwellenbach against Jose Soriano? Even though Soriano's numbers look decent this year, his numbers against Atlanta, it's a very minimal sample size, but they're not great. So it's not really something I'd really want to do. I don't want to play Anaheim there. I don't want to go against Schwellenbach, but Atlanta's dropped from minus 145 to minus 138 with 86% of the tickets on them because, of course, the public is going to come in on the Braves against Anaheim. I mean, Anaheim sucks, so the public's going to want to come in on the decent Braves team, but 66% of the cash on Anaheim. Kind of weird to see that. A little bit interesting. Whatever. Let's go to the actual plays. One is going to be on a total and one is going to be on a side. The total is going to be the under in Minnesota at Texas. I'm playing an under at Texas, which tends to be a decent hitting ballpark, but I'm going to do it here, and the market looks like it is signaling on it with this line down from 8.5 juice to the over at minus 125. It looks like it was at some point down to 8.5 juice to the under at minus 122. 70% of the tickets on the over. Of course, Minnesota, Texas, both teams can score pretty decently. So I think the public is only going to want to come in and play an over here. They don't really know who these pitchers are necessarily, or don't think that they're that great. These are certainly not name pitchers, but I do think that they're both kind of flying under the radar still and looks good for an under to me. 81% of the cash is coming in on the under. So it looks like even though the public seems to like the over here, the market indicators are against it, with the cash against it, the line movement against it. And I kind of like it, man, even though these teams did both play yesterday. Low scoring 3-2 game, but I don't think that's affecting the total here very much. We're not really getting a worse price here. You can still get under 8.5 at the straight up minus 110 right now. So just the standard price for it. So that looks decent to me. It looks like it really hasn't moved that much, even though the public is coming in on the over. So that may kind of tell you something there as well. And in the game yesterday, it was a 3-2 Minnesota win. So yeah, like I said, it's low scoring, but I don't think it's really affecting the game total that was rolled out in this game, really. And neither bullpen really got that taxed yesterday. So I think we're still fine to kind of play an under here, even though it was a close, low-scoring game. So both teams did kind of use a couple of their better relief pitchers, but 3 relief pitchers each. I think we're still decent coming into this game. I think the bullpens are not in horrendous shape coming into this one. And I do believe that were both teams off? Or no, because yesterday would have been the day off. Teams get Thursdays off, so never mind. I was thinking they might have had rest before that. I don't think they did. No, because Texas was playing my Red Sox, and Minnesota was playing in that series where I won a game against the Royals. So, yeah, it's true. These teams haven't been rested, but I still kind of like this for the under, man. And a lot of it has to do with the starting pitching matchups. Like I said, both relief staffs didn't really get too taxed yesterday. On one side, you got Simeon Woods Richardson pitching for Minnesota. He wasn't really like a hugely touted prospect coming into this season, but he's been really good in his rookie season as a 23-year-old. He's surprised everyone, including me. I mean, I thought he might be okay, but he's been much better than expected, I would say. And he's only allowed 4 or more earned runs in 3 starts over the course of the entire season. And all the rest of his starts, he's allowed 3 or fewer. In 17 of 20 starts, he's done that. So that's pretty good. He is coming off a pretty big game where he pitched well against Cleveland and actually lost the game. He went 7 innings long, only 4 hits, 7-0 strikeout walk ratio in that one. Allowed 2 solo home runs in that one. But whatever. I mean, he was coming off a weirdly bad start against the White Sox where he walked 3 guys in 4 innings and his pitch count got high and they had to take him out. Maybe he was just totally unfocused. He was coming off kind of a bad start against the Mets, which was actually his worst start of the season, but it was a road start against a good hitting team. Other than that, he has been good, even though he started kind of slipping a little bit after a much better start to the season. His ERA was in the 4s the last couple of months, but that Cleveland start, I don't think he's going to be in a letdown after that. I think that's going to give him some new momentum after he had a couple of subpar starts, a couple of his worst starts of the season, really. I think he might bounce back to it here. And like I said, he's a guy who's not allowed too many runs. His overall stats this season are pretty good. 91-31 strikeout walk ratio isn't too bad. The number of walks maybe a little bit high. Not a huge strikeout rate, but that's not horrible. And 11 home runs is mediocre as well, not horrible. 11 home runs allowed in 102 and a third innings pitched, only 90 hits allowed. So he has not allowed many hits. He has not been that hittable. His strikeout walk ratio, like I said, is not really horrendous either. So he hasn't really been pitching badly. He's having a good season overall. 3.78 ERA, 1.18 whip, and up against Texas, they essentially have never seen him before. Only Grossman has ever seen him before, and he's 1 for 3 with a single. So effectively, Woods Richardson basically has never been seen before by these opposing hitters. So as I always say, when you have a young guy who's pitching pretty well, this opposing lineup tends to be at a disadvantage against them the first couple times they have to face them because they don't know what to expect. They have to get used to facing them, and that may be the case here with Texas, even though they do have a pretty good offense up against Woods Richardson. I think he can hold them down a bit in this one. And then on the other side, Andrew Heaney, I mean, he's a guy who I haven't really loved throughout his career. He's up in his 30s now. His win-loss record looks pretty bad this year, 4-12. Not good, especially when you have a good offense behind him. But that offense must not really be helping him out because his stats this season aren't really that bad. A 4.05 ERA, 1.23 whip, both slightly high to my liking, but his overall stats not bad. 115-34 strikeout walk ratio. Nothing to really scoff at there. 16 home runs allowed is all right, especially when you pitch in a home run park like Texas, which makes this a little bit dangerous because it is a home run park. Got to avoid some of the flukes here, basically. And Heaney has only allowed 114 hits in 120 innings pitched. So strikeout rate, decently high. Strikeout walk rate, not bad. Amount of hits allowed, not bad either. He's been pretty decent, man. He's coming off a bad start, but it was on the road at the Yankees, and that's a tall task, tall order against a good opposing offense there. So I think he might bounce back. He had a good start against Houston the start before that, a 6-inning, 1-hit performance at home, 4-1 strikeout walk ratio, and that one only allowed 1 earned run on a solo homer against a good offense like Houston, so that was good. And he was coming off a brutal bad start where he allowed 6 earned runs against St. Louis in 4 1/3 on the road. But he is at home here. He may be better at home. I'm just kind of eyeballing his stats here. I think he is probably a better home pitcher than road pitcher because it looks like most of his worst starts were all road starts. So I think we do have that. I can look at the splits real quick. I think we do have that going for us here in this one. Let me look real quick. Yeah, he's got a 3.55 ERA at home this year and a 190 opponent batting average at home. That's quite good. And away, significantly different. Away, he has a 4.41 ERA and 276 opponent batting average. So he indeed has been much better at home. His last few starts, he alternated good and bad starts. Coming off that bad one against the Yankees, I think he might bounce back in this one. And I think both starting pitchers are probably going to be focused because you got, on the one side, you got Texas. They're the returning world champs. I don't think you're going to be unfocused against them. And they're not playing horribly this year either. Minnesota's playing decently this season as well. Both these teams still contending. So I think you are going to see focused efforts from both these starters, I would hope. And Heaney, like I said, trying to bounce back from only going 4 2/3, allowing 3 earned runs against the Yankees, 1 home run, 4-2 strikeout walk ratio. Not a great start, but against one of the best offenses in baseball. So what can you really do? And up against Minnesota, he has been good against them. They've seen him a bit, but they're only 7 for 49 off him with 3 doubles, 1 home run, 1 RBI, 14-3 strikeout walk ratio. So in that sample size of almost 50 at bats, he's held Minnesota's hitters to a 143 average and 458 OPS. Really weak stats. So I like the under here, under 8.5. Woods Richardson on one side hasn't been seen before, and Heaney on the other side has pitched pretty well historically against Minnesota. So let's grab the under 8.5, Minnesota, Texas. And then the other game I'm going to be on is a side, and it's going to be to fade the Milwaukee Brewers. They played yesterday. This is the other matchup we have today with a team that played yesterday facing a team that did not play. Milwaukee's not traveling, but they're coming off a big series against the LA Dodgers, man, a 4-game home series. You're going to step up for a game like that. In Milwaukee, sitting very, very comfortably in first place right now in the NL Central, so they don't really have to worry about that. And now they're facing an interleague series coming off of a big series where they lost the first 2 to the Dodgers and won the last 2. Maybe that haunted hotel that Milwaukee puts their opponents up in finally got to the Dodgers. That resurfaced because Mookie Betts was refusing to stay in the hotel. And there are a lot of like ghost stories and haunted hotel stories that come from opponents that have stayed in that hotel. I think Milwaukee actually does it intentionally to mess with their opponents' heads. They put them in a haunted hotel. It's a nice luxury hotel, but it is supposedly filled with paranormal activity. It's an old hotel, of course. It's crazy, man. But whatever the case may be, I don't think it had any effect, really. I'm kidding, obviously, but maybe it does. Maybe that's a new spot. It's the haunted hotel, the haunted hotel spot, the haunted hotel situation. But no, Milwaukee lost the first 2 at home to the Dodgers. Then they won the most recent 2. So 2 big wins, split the big series with the Dodgers, and now that's what they're coming off of. They used 3 relief pitchers yesterday. So they didn't really tax their bullpen that much, but they're up against a Cleveland team who did not use any of their relievers yesterday because Cleveland was off, which does mean Cleveland was traveling, but Cleveland has momentum right now, man. They played a 4-game series, a big series on the road against the Twins, finished that winning the last 2, came home and then swept the Chicago Cubs 3 games in a row, which I don't think is that important to Cleveland necessarily. It's a big, it's not big. It's an interleague series. The Cubs aren't doing great this year, even though they have a big name. Cleveland, I think that's just going to spur them as they go out on the road, man. They won 3 games in a row at home. They've won 5 in a row. They got the momentum right now, and hopefully this will be a momentum continuer. They're starting a road trip against the team that's in first place in the NL Central. So I think Cleveland has more reason to be focused here, man. When you're starting a road trip, and of course it helps that it's against a good team, even though Cleveland also is a good team and has a really good record. Cleveland also doesn't have as big a padding in the AL Central that Milwaukee does in the NL Central. So Cleveland battling with Minnesota and Kansas City still, they kind of need to win games right now more than the Brewers do. So there is that aspect of this too. But Cleveland going out on the road, the first game of a road trip tends to be a more focused spot for a team. You get to go, you go out on the road and you want to start off that road trip right. And it sometimes is helpful if you won some games against maybe kind of a lesser team, which I think they just did against the Cubs at home. And that's what you're coming off of. You kind of tend to continue that momentum. So I like that. So I think this is a focus and momentum continuing a spot for Cleveland here. So I like that. Whereas I think it's a letdown spot for Milwaukee after 4 get-up games against the Dodgers and 2 big wins in the last 2 of those. I do think it's a letdown spot. I think they might have reason to maybe be less focused on Cleveland because I think the Dodger series is actually more important, whereas Cleveland coming off kind of a less important interleague series against Chicago, even though this is another interleague series, I think they are going to be focused because it is Milwaukee. It is on the road. They are going to be probably having to stay in that haunted hotel, but whatever. We're going to go with Cleveland to avoid the hauntings. And I think we're actually getting maybe a little bit of value here on the Cleveland side. And I do see some market movement going towards Cleveland, even though the market percentages look like they're totally against Cleveland right now. I think due to what we see in the line movement, I think those percentages might be inaccurate and might flip around, but we'll see about that because we have conflicting indicators right now. Cleveland has flipped from plus 107 to minus 109. So the odds makers are telling you something, man. Even though Cleveland is hot and they have a really good record, even better than Milwaukee's, maybe they'll draw some public action because of that. But the odds makers are telling you, we think Cleveland is probably the better team and has the better of this matchup here. And maybe it's factoring in the rest scenario that I mentioned as well. Cleveland not having to travel too far, by the way, just going from where they were at home, right? Yeah, like I say, yeah, just going from Cleveland to Milwaukee, yeah, whatever. But Cleveland has flipped from plus 107 to minus 109. So the odds makers telling you we think Cleveland is the better team. We're going to favor them on the road, and they have the better of this matchup. And I do agree with that, which I'll talk about in a second. 65% of the tickets on Cleveland, though, and it looks like 52% of the cash on the other side of Milwaukee right now. I think, again, like I said, I think we might see that turn around due to the fact that we've seen the line flip the favorite in this one. So I'm not sure that money percentage is actually accurate. We'll see about that. Cleveland has Gavin Williams pitching, and if you glance at his stats, they don't look great. 4.3 ADRA and 1.36 whip. He's a guy I've talked about on the show, though, and I think he is better than his stats would indicate. He had a bad start to start the season against the Chicago White Sox. He's a guy who's young. He's 25. He had one season last year and put together some decent numbers. He just walked too many guys last year, basically, but his ERA was low. His whip wasn't horrifically high last year. For rookie season, I'll take it. I don't think he's bad, and I kind of expect him to kind of return to form here. Excuse me. As I was saying, he had a bad start against the White Sox, which is weird, but I'll give him a pass because it was the first game of the season. He had a delayed start to the season. He didn't join the rotation again until July. I think he was injured to start the season, so he came in July. And I think he was just trying to reacclimate, so he didn't have a good start against the White Sox. But then he was off to the races after that, allowing 0, 1, 3, 3, and 0 earned runs in the next starts. The 3 against San Diego wasn't really good because he only went 3 2/3, but they're a really good hitting team. In the other games, he went at least 5 1/3, or no, at least 5, in the other 4 games, allowing 3, 0, 1, and 0 earned runs. But 3 of those 4 were against Detroit. So maybe he just has Detroit's number, but I think that's still impressive because you're facing Detroit 3 times in quick succession, all within a month. So that lineup is like very, very used to you, and they still didn't hit him very well, even though Detroit's offense isn't very good. I think that's still impressive that Williams was able to do that against a team that he was just facing over and over again. Even if he does pitch well against him, you expect the offense to do better once they're used to him, but they didn't really do so. So he had good numbers against Detroit. And the other win in there was against Tampa Bay, or the other game. They won the game. He didn't get the win. It was against Tampa. They're kind of weak too. Then he did have a pretty bad start against Baltimore after that third Detroit start. Baltimore, very good hitting team. He had an 8.2 strikeout walk ratio in that game, but he gave up 6 runs in 4 innings pitched and 8 hits. That's not good. He put way too many men on base. Baltimore kind of rocked him. Strikeout walk ratio tells you that he does still have something going on there, that he can still throw. So I do like that. And he came out of that and he bounced back pretty nicely with a 6-inning, 1-run, 4-hit performance with no walks and 3 strikeouts on the road at Minnesota in a big divisional game. So I like that. So I think Williams might have a little bit of momentum coming into this start. I think he got back on the right foot there, back on the right track there with a win over Minnesota. And Minnesota's an offense that isn't really a slouch. So I like that. And now he's going out on the road and facing the Milwaukee Brewers, who have never seen him before. Of course, you knew I was going to say that. So we have Williams, who's a decent young pitcher, and I think being undervalued maybe in the market because his overall stats don't look that great. And yeah, I think that is the case there, and I think he'll have the slight edge because the Brewers' offense has never seen him before. So I like that. He's got a 42-13 strikeout walk ratio this year. Not a bad strikeout walk ratio. 40 hits allowed in 39 innings pitched. Those are all decent stats, I would say. The number of hits a little bit too high, number of walks a little bit too high, but strikeout walk ratio not bad. Pretty high strikeout rate. Williams, I think, is a pretty decent young pitcher. So Milwaukee, I do think, may be at a disadvantage the first couple of times they have to face him, where they have to adjust to him. And on the other side, Aaron Savale is pitching for Milwaukee. Former Cleveland Indian, by the way, Aaron Savale. So he's facing his former team, but he's been away from them for a while now. So I don't think it's a situation where he's going to be all pumped up to face the team that got rid of him, because that was like a few seasons ago at this point. So he's faced them since then, I'm sure. So I don't think that's going to really factor in. I don't think it's going to matter. He was traded by Tampa to Milwaukee, and he's made a bunch of starts with Milwaukee since then, and they've been mediocre, really. He's kind of been all over the place. Pitching okay, I would say 4-1, 3-2, 5, and 2 earned runs allowed in those starts, so kind of all over the place. And he might be in line for a worse start here because he had a better start the start before that, but he's been walking way too many guys. I mean, he's got a, what has he got here? 29-12 strikeout walk ratio. It looks like with Milwaukee. That's not very good. That's way too many walks. 6.1 ERA in the 2 starts this month, with a bad start at Washington and a better one at home against Cincinnati. That's not great either. His ERA last month was 4.29, which isn't really anything to love either. He's just been
mediocre at best and kind of bad throughout the season, even though a 113 to 39 strikeout walk ratio looks pretty good. But he's allowed 23 home runs and 126 hits and 118 in a third innings pitch. So he's been quite hittable this year. And like I said, his overall stats are pretty bad. High ERA, high whip. That hasn't really changed with the change of scenery. Going to Milwaukee, he's been not very good with them either. And up against Cleveland, we only have a small sample size, but he hasn't done great against them. They're 6 for 19 off him lifetime with a triple, 1 RBI, 2-1 strikeout walk ratio. Small sample size, but it's a 316 batting average and 771 OPS. So Cleveland has done okay against him. So I'm going to jump in and do it and take Gavin Williams in that one. Take Cleveland, and that's going to do it for me, man. Those two plays, Minnesota, Texas, under 8.5, and Cleveland Indians, minus 115, I think is the best you can do on that money line price. Peace out, man.